Welcome to Not Your Ordinary Parts, a podcast where we talk about hard things associated with the human experience with the goal of increasing awareness, growth, and healing. You may hear information from professionally licensed therapists, life coaches, healers, doctors, etc. This information is not medical advice or therapy, and it's not meant to replace actual therapy or instructions given by a doctor or a personal therapist. I'm your host, Jalon Johnson. My guest today is Dr. Galit Atlas. Dr. Atlas is a psychoanalyst, writer, and internationally renowned voice in the world of emotional healing whose work illuminates the invisible threads between our personal suffering and the legacies we inherit. She is a faculty member at NYU's Postdoctoral program in psychotherapy and psychoanalysis, and a celebrated clinician who has spent decades helping people overcome the unspoken stories that live in their bodies, relationships, and choices. Dr. Atlas is the author of Emotional Inheritance, a groundbreaking book that explores how trauma we didn't experience directly can shape our lives in ways we don't always understand, and how healing often begins by naming what has long been unsaid.
Hmm.
Her writing has appeared in the New York Times, The Atlantic, Oprah Daily, and other major publications where her voice brings both intellectual clarity and emotional resonance to topics that are often hidden in silence. Dr. Atlas teaches that what we carry from generations before us is not just pain, but also resilience, creativity, and longing. Her work is not just about the past, it's about liberation in the present and bringing curiosity and compassion to the stories and legacies we've inherited, and in so doing, reclaiming the right to choose our future. Dr. Atlas's presence in the field is as poetic as it is precise, and she's a constant reminder that healing is not just about erasing the past. It's about finding ourselves within and learning to live fully while holding what came before. So, Dr. Atlas, welcome to the show, and thank you so much for being my guest.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me, and thank you for this beautiful summary and introduction.
You're very welcome. And also, I did give a brief introduction, but so that the audience can get to know you a little bit better, would you mind giving us a little bit of background about yourself and how you got to who and where you are today, please?
So, as you said, I'm a psychoanalyst. I teach at NYU Postdoctoral program for psychotherapy and psychoanalysis, and also Columbia University trauma program. I wrote, published 3 books for clinicians, and my work is focused on, I would say that all of my work, my professional work and then my work for the public with emotional inheritance, is focused on the unconscious bond between people in relationships, in families, between parents and children, between siblings, couples. And Emotional Inheritance was my first book for a general public, and it was published in 28 languages. And I am now just finished writing my next book that will be published next year. And I think that really my professional path started as a clinician, as a professor, as a teacher, and as a professional writer, and then slowly moved to really communicate those psychoanalytic ideas to a general population.
Mm. I'm so glad you did. And I'm excited for your new book that's coming out.
Thank you.
I think sitting with your work and learning more about like your concepts has felt both like a map and a mirror all in one. And it's made me feel something so deeply inside that I always knew that was there, but never really had language for it.
Mm.
Um, the way you've named the idea that we carry what's been passed down, even when it's unspoken, there aren't really words for that. And I guess that's kind of the point is that it's always been there, but unspoken,
Mm.
just felt and known. So for listeners who may not be familiar with you or your work, if you had to introduce yourself, how would you describe who you are, what brought you here, your emotional inheritance, and how your story shaped the way that you offer others healing now?
So you will see that I always move between the personal and the professional. And that's kind of what I do in my books as well. I would like to introduce the professional and the ideas, but also to always stay very, very close to the personal, to the connection, to the emotional experience. And I like a mirror and a map.
Mhm.
In my book, I say that research is a me-search, which again is an integration of the intellectual and the emotional. That means that every intellectual investigation is an emotional one. 10 years ago, maybe even more than 10 years ago, I was part of a study group of senior clinicians. And what we investigated was what we called the ghosts in the consulting room. And so you will see that I often talk about ghosts as the image of this unspeakable. All of those things that are absent, but in fact so present in our therapy room. And I was especially interested in the secrets of previous generations and how they live in our unconscious. So, like in therapy, I think writing is a process where you often have to create first. Like in therapy, people talk first and only then they reflect on it. So you don't always know in advance what you're unconsciously looking for or what you're unconsciously preoccupied with. And that was my own me-search process. I knew I was drawn to something, but initially I didn't fully understand why. And I started writing the book. When in the book I share that when my life partner was sick with cancer, and I was trying to make sense of his pain and my pain and of the idea of losing him. He died in February 2019, and I finished writing the book in 2020. So my writing of this book was really laced with a lot of pain and loss. And through the writing process, I really, as you said, I always asked myself, why am I writing this? What is my research? And I found myself going back to the loss and struggle of my parents and grandparents who experienced a lot of loss, and trying to make sense of loss, which was in some unconscious way in dialogue with my history and their history. And I guess it always is, right? It always is. There is a constant unconscious dialogue between generations. And I think that's what I'm communicating in the book as well, that we get our anxiety and fear and ways of functioning and ways of coping from them. And we, as you said before, we get our resilience from them and our ability to survive our own traumas.
Sure. Thank you for sharing that. So, in your me search, and I love that term. I want to dig a little bit deeper. Like, what was early life like for you? Like, what did you discover based off of um, the unspoken between your parents and maybe grandparents? What type of home did you come from? What were the things that you experienced as a child?
My mother was born in Syria. And in the book, I really describe her immigration process. That my kids actually love that story of her immigration, because she was 4 years old when they escaped Syria. And I tell the story of she was one of 7 kids, and some Syrian man came with a wagon and to drive them through the border, and they forgot her. She was sleeping. It was the middle of the night. She was 4 years old, and her family left, and she was forgotten behind. In the middle of the road, suddenly her parents were like, wait a second, where is Shoshi? And they had to go back and pick her up. And it's very interesting because to me as a psychoanalyst, those stories are the stories that in the consulting rooms are the sometimes where everything hides, because my mother was the forgotten one. And the silent one, and we'll talk about silences. So she immigrated from Syria. My father was born in Iran, and they were Jews who escaped in the late 50s. And as children, they were immigrants. Both lived in poverty. Both lost siblings. And my research was on the ghosts of the unsaid and the unspeakable. And I realized that I was interested in the unspeakable because I come from a family where the message was, and tell me if you're familiar with that it's better not to talk about things, because what you don't talk about doesn't hurt. And I think in the book, I really challenge that, my family heritage, I would say, of like, shh, don't talk about things. And so I became in my family the voice. I mean, in my previous career, I was a singer as a child, actually, standing on stage. And I was the one who asked the question, that no one, the one that who broke the silence, the one who says what was not allowed, said what was not allowed. And I made this my profession, I guess. I help others to find their voice and to unpack the secrets, not only the secrets of their families, but also the secrets of the mind, which I'm sure we'll talk about, right? The secrecy goes down, into the internal world. We keep secrets from ourselves too.
Oh man. Thank you for sharing that. And yes, we will get into that. It's so incredible how so many of us come from a legacy of silence, right? And that silence is as a result of pain. And the
Mm-hmm.
pain is trying to be avoided.
Mm-hmm.
And I think what our ancestors didn't know is that the way through the pain is not by avoiding it. It's by actually, stepping up to it and processing it and speaking all the things that we avoid and we're told to keep silent.
Right.
So thank you for touching on that. You also write that when someone experiences a trauma that's too painful to process, it becomes a secret, and not only to others but also to themselves. So I wanted to ask you, while we're here, were there any secrets or was there a secret or secrets in your lineage that you discovered?
You know, it's interesting because on the surface, the answer would say no. There was no what we call capital S secrets that I discovered. And I think that the power of this book is not in finding the secret that is but instead, I have a much broader definition of what a secret is. And I'm talking really about making connections between past and present and talking about the things we were not allowed to talk about, the dissociated reality. So many times, I mean, in my family, and I'll tell you more about that, what happened. For example, I knew that my mother was 10 years old. When she was 10 years old, she had lost her brother, whom she really loved, who drowned in the sea. And I talk about it in one of the chapters in the book. That was not a secret. It wasn't a family secret. But it was what the psychoanalyst Christopher Wallace calls the unthought known. We were not allowed to talk about it, which for kids also means that they're not allowed to think about it. The unthought known is an interesting and actually confusing form where you know facts, but you have no space, right? And the word space is really important here, to think about them or to talk about them. And this is, as you said before, this is how families try to avoid pain. Trauma then is kept frozen, dissociated, outside of what we call the thinkable. And our therapeutic work then is a work of trying to recover those connections, trying to make connections and bring forgotten parts of our history and of ourselves to life. Because what happens is that when something is forgotten, a part of us is forgotten, right? When something is unthinkable, a part of us is becoming unthinkable. And maybe I'll tell you later, or tell me if you want me to tell you how I think about the too muchness in the emotional inheritance versus the absence, what's not enough. Because these are two forms of transmitting trauma to the next generation.
I think that the absence and the too much, like separating the two, does so much good, because when everything is just blended, like, it causes confusion. If there's already the unthought known,
Right.
is that what you call it?
Yes, I think that's the psychoanalyst Christopher Wallace was calling this, and he was talking really about the unthought known is that the known that we are not
Right.
allowed. And allowed, by the
Exactly.
way, is not just from the outside. We're not allowed from the inside to think about it. Right? We don't allow ourselves.
So deep. So deep. Um,
Mm-mm.
it's so nice to hear where you came from, especially because of the work that you do and how what you describe about the work gets carried forward through silence and survival. I want to ask you this today: when you sit across from someone, who was the woman sitting there? What would you say stayed with you over the years, and what changed?
That's such a good question. You know, I like to think about ourselves and especially about adults and with the framework of self states, which means that I bring with me the child I was, the mother I am, the partner I am, and the psychoanalyst who sees patients for now more than 25 years. So I think all of those parts of me are there, and I met and took care of many, many people, and I loved many of them, and I learned a lot from them, and they are part of who I am. So I would say that in one way or another, everything and everyone stays with me. And what has changed is that it's interesting. I'm thinking to myself, what is the difference between the child I used to be and the adult that I am? And maybe one of the differences that I can think of is that I have more faith. I trust the process, and I trust myself more than I did when I was younger. And maybe that's the main difference. Because you know how when you read things you wrote years ago, and that happened to me. I wrote diaries when I was a child, and when I read my diaries, I've actually recognized myself. I read it and I think, wow, I have not changed. I'm the same
Mm.
person. How, how great and how troubling, right? That you do so much work, and in your essence, you think almost the same, right? Which is interesting, right? It brings us into the topic of change and of, to your question, right? What do you bring with you? You bring that young person with you, and that's part of what we want, right? We don't want to get rid of the children we were. In fact, the opposite. We would like to invite them and give them a seat at the table and ask them, how are you? How are you doing? What do you need?
I love that so
What can you
much.
teach
Thank
us?
you for sharing that. Um, yes, exactly. Because if we can keep that childlike essence, I think that does a lot of good for
Mm,
the older parts. You know, and letting all of that integrate into who we currently are. Because I mean, we're so many different ages. We're 4, we're 7, we're all those things and all those years that we experienced collectively make up who we are. And so we can't say, well, you're not welcomed here because when you were 11, you did this, or it has to be an integration.
exactly, exactly. I think the word integration is the right word here. What we want is to integrate different parts of ourselves and dialogue with different parts of ourselves
Mhm.
and invite all of the parts of ourselves to the table, to not only to comfort them and heal them, because some of them need healing, but also to learn from them and to ask them what,
Yes.
right? They bring something to the table. And that is
Right.
important, I think, and it's part of a very, very important part of the therapeutic work.
I agree so much. There's something in the way you write and speak that makes people feel both seen and unsettled, but in the best possible way. When you think about the heart of your work, what is it that you're really trying to offer? And have you gotten any pushback about the concept of emotional inheritance?
It's a good question. I actually didn't get pushback on that concept because I think in some ways, intuitively, it speaks to everyone. Uh, that's at least that was the feedback I got, is that people had. It's a concept that people didn't think about, but the minute they learn about it, they have. Some people wrote me, I had an aha moment, and I thought, oh, that's an interesting way, to think like,
Mhm.
oh. I have to say, aha moments are beautiful. They're the beginning of our work. They're not the end of the work. So I think what I really try to offer, and I hope that that's what you got from me, is an emotional experience, a therapeutic experience. I even might dare to say, because the stories I tell, my wish is that you will have a therapeutic experience of recognizing yourself in the stories of others, in my own stories. So the heart of the analytic work is self-reflection and awareness. And this is a big part of what I try to offer my readers, a way to think about yourself, to reflect, and to find meaning. So all of that is not an intellectual work. And you say that we're talking about integration today. It's really the work of like thinking and feeling and moving in between ideas and feelings.
I think that aha moment is definitely something anybody who comes across your work will feel. Because, like we said, it's something that we all innately know, but may not know how to articulate or may not have the language for.
Mm.
And I think that emotional inheritance has opened a door for so many people who sensed that they were living outside of something that wasn't fully theirs, but didn't know how to trace it. And for those who haven't read the book, how do you define emotional inheritance? And not just as a theory, but as something living and breathing in people's lives?
Emotional inheritance, in theory, is the idea that experiences, and especially raw and unprocessed experiences, inevitably pass down from generation to generation. That means that our parents and grandparents live inside us, I call it. Their experiences shape our lives. The choices they make are related to the choices we make, the choices we cannot make, the ways we feel and experience things, our fears, our longings. In reality, I think it's interesting because I talked before about the too muchness and the not enoughness. And maybe I'll say something about that, because I feel like there are, in my book, I discuss two ways in which trauma can pass down. And that's not just in theory. I call it the too muchness and the not enoughness. Those who know my work will recognize that a lot of my previous writing for therapists is on the topic of too muchness. Affect that is not regulated, things that are too much for our system to hold, to process, to, anything that our system resists, right? Because it's too much, including, right? We're talking about trauma. Trauma is almost always, not almost, is always too much. And in the intergenerational context, what we often do with too muchness is one generation dumps it on the other. So one generation, for example, floods the other with too much information, and processes things through the next generation, meaning like telling them too many details, creating a feeling in them. You know what I'm referring to? Making them hold some of the trauma for us. Right. So you see that there is something in the too much. It's really about the flooding of the next generation. And when I see it clinically, what I see is people come to therapy with the first chapter of my book is on Eve, is a chapter where the patient comes and tells me her mother's story almost as if she experienced it herself, because the mother told her every detail. She knows she knows too much. The flip side of that is more like my family, is the not enoughness, is the opposite. It's when one generation leaves the other generation with gaps, with absence, where something is missing. And I think there are few chapters in emotional inheritance, like the Noah chapter, if you remember, that Noah comes to therapy and he says, I feel like I had a twin brother who died. And his mother tells him, "Oh, you're so crazy. You always have bizarre fantasies. Stop it." And the feeling with Noah is that he has this, he calls it a crazy thought about having a twin brother. And there is no way in reality that he could uh, even ask anyone about it, because everybody dismisses it. And then, just as a quick spoiler for your listeners, years later, we process it, and we process his relation with death, and his relation to his mother, who was to some degree, he experienced her as dead. And years later, we find out that Noah had a brother. It wasn't his twin brother, but it was a brother who died before he was born, and that he was named after. The brother's name was Noah. And I think that was the first chapter I wrote for the book. I actually wrote it in 2014, published as a piece in the New York Times. That both Noah and I thought, it's so unusual. It's such an unusual story. And of course, all my patients gave me permission, and I wrote it with him, and he even chose his pseudonym, and it was out in the New York Times. And the same day, I started getting hundreds of emails from people telling me similar stories about, again, the not enoughness, the gaps, the absence, what we feel but don't fully know. And what a relief to put things together. And so we're these are the ghosts of the unsaid and the unspeakable that we're talking about. And that's how it looks clinically. It looks like I feel something and I don't know where it's coming from. And I'm sure we'll talk more about gaps and how to work, right? How do you work with the absence? I think that's right. That's a confusing thing. Yeah.
It's one thing to know it, but you can have this knowing, and now it's like, okay, what do I do with it? Right.
Yeah.
It's like you can have all the ingredients to make an amazing dinner, but if you don't know how to cook,
exactly,
what's the point?
Exactly.
One of the most haunting ideas in your book is that we can be loyal to the suffering of those who came before us without realizing it.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk about this unconscious loyalty and how it might shape the choices people make in various aspects of their lives?
It's probably one of the most important concepts in the book, unconscious loyalty. Because what is unconscious loyalty? I mean, on the surface, we think we know who we are loyal to, right? And I think that sometimes what we find through the process of analysis is that who we think we're loyal to is not necessarily who we are loyal to. And we are very loyal to the suffering of those we love. And it often manifests as survivor guilt, meaning we feel guilty for we feel guilty for thriving. We minimize any suffering of our own. And that often comes with identification with the previous generations and with our loyalties to them. But it also shows itself in an unconscious wish to repair. I write a lot about that, or wish to be who they couldn't be, as I mentioned before, do what they couldn't do, or undo their trauma. So I'll give you an example. For example, I had I give talks for clinicians, and in one of the professional talks I gave, at the end of the talk, somebody raised her hand, and she said, something happened to me today. I realized something that I did not think about before, the unthought known. I knew that in my previous career, before I was a therapist, I was a midwife. And I knew that in my family history, my grandmother, and I'm changing the details a little bit just for the privacy of that person. My grandmother died during childbirth, and my mother had, didn't have her. She died when she gave birth to my mother, And that was known. That was a very known history that my mother grew up without her mother. But I never put together the idea that I chose to be a midwife because that was my family history. And it was the first time that I put those together and understood that I had a wish to undo what happened or to repair or to save other women through saving other women and other children who were her own mother, right? And so I think that's a piece of emotional inheritance that we don't think about when we talk about intergenerational transmission of trauma. We think about symptoms. We think about anxiety. We think about depression. We think about how the fear and the pain of previous generation manifests itself. But we don't always think about our unconscious loyalties and unconscious choice and how it looks. And that's a piece that I discuss in the book. It's less about symptoms. It's more about how it shapes our life.
I love that you said intergenerational transmission, because I think if you can grasp what that means, is that it's happening. It's going in between the generations,
Mm-hmm.
whether we have a say in it or not. I mean, we don't have a say in it. So recognizing that it's there can provide a lot of relief for people. Even like you said, like, the example you just gave, she became a midwife because of what was known. And in some way or shape or form, she was trying to undo something that was missing or provide relief for pain that she may not have been able to have words for. And she did this unconsciously.
Yes, exactly. I think that's the interesting work that we're doing, right? That we try to understand the unconscious choices. Because all of that, and by the way, she maybe, if we talked about it before, she would choose the same thing, right? I don't know that if she wouldn't make that choice consciously. Many times people would not make those choices consciously, but sometimes they do. But what our work is to allow a person to choose if they want to do it or they don't want to do it, and to make some of the unconscious, right? If we believe in the unconscious, which of course we all do, then we know that there is always a piece that will remain unconscious. But what we try is to have some control over our lives and really understand ourselves and make decisions, have agency. Maybe that's the right way to say it.
For sure. Having agency also can provide safety. And there's a passage where you write, we tend to confuse what is familiar with what is safe. Can you speak to how early emotional patterns, even painful ones, become familiar, and how that familiarity plays out in our adult relationships?
There is part of me that wants to bring you back that question and ask you.
This is your interview.
And then I thought, oh, he knows what he's talking about. There's something here, we are attracted to the familiar, right? And what does that mean? So let me try to unpack it for you, and maybe you can add some of your own thoughts about it. Because I think that, first of all, the most obvious thing is that we're attracted to the familiar because it's known and predictable. It's our home. And we will always, again, I like the word dialogue, as you noticed, and we always dialogue with our home. We either go back to it, sometimes we go back to it unconsciously, sometimes we run back to our home because we don't have any other home. And we don't want to be left out without a home. So we go back to homes even unconsciously, even if they are haunted, even if they are filled with demons. And that's what we see, right? That's what we expect. And so why do we do that? There are a few explanations, psychoanalytic explanations to that. One is, again, because that's all we know. And the devil, is better than, not being in a place that is unknown. But also because in going back to the familiar, lies the hope for reparation. this is what psychoanalysis calls the repetition compulsion. You know what I'm referring to? That we go back to the same place again and again. The human unconscious brings us to the place where things went wrong. It's related to that idea of repair, with the wish to do it all over again. We repeat and we try to achieve, Freud called it delayed mastery, over events that left us wounded, that we couldn't protect ourselves against, or that we felt ashamed and guilty of. So in our repetition compulsion, we wish to relive, and this time do things better. Do it again. Gain control over most, especially helpless. It's something that we are talking about when we talk about experiences that left us helpless and out of control. It is a wish to redo it. And one of the things that we find, first of all, is that repetition and reparation are related. You want to repair and then you repeat again and again and again. And that a lot of people that really try to do things better end up bringing themselves to the same place. And the other concept that is related to that is the wish to turn a victim into a victor, which means that if something happened to you, you repeat it from a different angle and you do it all over again. But this time, you're not the victim, you're the victor, right? And that's where you see in family dynamics, parents abusing their children, or people, what we call in psychoanalysis, identifying with the aggressor, meaning that something was done to you, you identify with what was done to you, with the aggressor, and then you do the same thing, but this time you're not the victim.
I wish we had 10 hours to talk about that.
Tell me if there is too muchness here. Tell me.
No, not at all. I mean, this is, I think anyone who listens to this will number one, have that aha moment, and number two, want more, and I think be driven right to your book. But while I have you here, I want to try and get as many questions answered as I can. I know I can't ask them all because we don't have time, but let's see. Okay, here we go. You write that every choice is shaped by a legacy of feelings and experiences that are passed down from generation to generation. So now someone's in the kitchen, they have all the ingredients to cook. How did they do it, right? How do we begin to reclaim choice, agency, and all the things, especially when we've been living someone else's legacy?
Wow, that's a big question, right? How do we begin to do this work? And I think that the first thing to do is to tell your story to yourself. And the way I do it with patients, that especially in first sessions, is I really, somebody walks in and I say, like, tell me who you are. What is your story? And what I listen to is both what they say, but also what they don't say. I listen to the gaps. And you wouldn't believe it, how many gaps exist in each of our stories. You wouldn't believe how many, when somebody tells a story, how many things are left out. And I listen to both. It's not that I do not listen to what somebody says. I think it's very, very important what one brings in and what the narrative is. But the narrative is always missing something. And I think that what I want to say is that we make space to listen to everything. And like in art, you notice not just the color, but also the empty spaces on the canvas, right? Or in music. You hear in music, right? What makes the music is not just the notes, but the pauses between the lines. So we're listening means paying attention to the gaps. And I think that's where we start. The rest is right. The rest we could talk about where we go from there, but that's the beginning of it.
I never thought about that, paying attention to the gaps, because the gaps will tell you the story. and the things that are unspoken.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. You might not always
Oh
find
man.
a capital S secret, right? Because even looking for capital S secrets is like some kind of a fantasy that you're going to find something. And I kind of maybe trick you in the book because some of the chapters are a little bit like that people find something but then I stop the story, right? And the question is like in marriage, right? They lived happily ever after. Well, what happened after, right? So we are talking about people find something. It's, as you said before, it's always a relief to find something. I have never met or worked with a patient who discovered a family secret and it was not a relief. Never, not once. It's maybe counterintuitive because you think to yourself, oh my God, I don't want to know. And we trust the unconscious that if you don't want to know, you won't know. You won't find out if you're not ready to know. But if you're looking for something, or if you suspect that something is happening, when you find out, it is always a relief because you stop gaslighting yourself. There is a moment when you say, "Oh, okay, the known is so comforting." I was an unwelcome baby. My parents didn't want me. My mother, my mother was upset. My father was upset. They almost got divorced. They didn't want that baby. And even when I was born, they were fighting. They didn't want me. It's a horrible reality. But for many people, when they realize that, when that secret comes to life, they were like, oh, now everything falls into place. Now I understand why I'm feeling the way I'm feeling.
Yeah. I think it kind of allows the confusion to fall away, and then once the confusion has fallen away, you can sit with the knowing that's always been there and now make sense of it, and that gives you
Exactly.
agency. It gives you a sense of identity, a sense of feeling safe, so many things.
And it allows you to
Hmm.
process it, right? It allows you to think.
Yeah.
We're thinking. I'm reflecting on how many times I'm talking to you about the ability to process and to be able to think about something. It allows you to mourn something. It allows you to think about something. It allows you to connect it to other things in your life, to integrate your life. So it actually gives you, right, the knowledge you have, gives you the ability to mourn, which you didn't have.
That's so important. That's so important too. Um, what does it mean for you to be able to publish Emotional Inheritance? And in writing this book and all of the work that you're doing to help others, what is it you want people to know most?
Hmm. It's funny because when I wrote the book, I did not imagine anyone reading it. So when it came out, I thought to myself, oh no, now people actually are going to read it. There is so much about me in this book. I think in order to be able to write it, I had to dissociate or to think like, okay, I wrote books for clinicians. People read them, but not in that scale. And I think that was almost not something I expected. And in retrospect, it's true that I actually did not hold the reader in mind in the way that I was talking to a reader. I was holding my patients in mind. I was holding my own integrity, my own feelings. I tried to be very, very, we talked about loyalty, loyal to the truth of the moment, the truth of the session, the truth of my own emotions and my patients, and loyal to my patients. And I think that in some ways, what I was trying to is, in retrospect, I think I could see that what I did is that I brought you with me into my mind and into my heart. So I can't say that I had an agenda again, after it's like now it's, I think, 3 years since the book was published. I think my hope is to be to give you a resource, right? To really help you heal, right? To help people with their emotional pain, help them know themselves and others, and heal not only themselves, but also their intimate and meaningful relationships with their parents or with their spouses or with their children. Or
You did that. If that was your goal, you accomplished that. Thank
Thank
you.
you.
You did. I 1000% assure you that you did that. All right, last question for you. If you could use your platform to educate anyone who might be struggling with their mental or emotional health and might be uncertain of how or where to start, what would you say?
I would say that you start with slowing down. Slowing down. And again, what I mentioned before about telling your story, it requires slowing down. And our culture is so focused on quick fix and often surface fix. And when we're really doing the real work, it's a slow and layered by layered. And I think I would like to really end with thinking about how this work, a lot of it is work of acceptance. And sometimes people ask me what's the difference between acceptances and change. And my answer is always that acceptance is the most profound form of change, right? And our work of acceptance is accepting that things happened, the history, and all the bad things that happened, and mourning them. We can't change them, but we can sit with them, accepting the people in our lives with their limitations, and therefore accepting ourselves. And at the end of the day, I think our work ends with the ability to accept ourselves. And if I go back to the beginning of our conversation, the different self states and the different parts of ourselves, right? The child that we were, the adolescent, the parents, and everything, right? To bring everything together and integrate it and accept all the parts of ourselves.
It's so important, that integration. It's everything. It really is.
Mhm.
Thank you so much for this. This has been an amazing, amazing interview. I'm honored to have the opportunity to sit with you and to discuss your work and to discuss something that's so sacred and profound and emotional inheritance, because this this bond that we have between our ancestors and our parents and our grandparents that can be intercontinental. It could be, one person could be on another
Yeah,
side of the earth, and we still have that bridge between us, and giving language to that, I think, is so important. So I'm grateful to have this opportunity to be here with you, Dr. Atlas, and to share your work, and to allow for such a profound conversation.
thank you so much for your depth and curiosity and wisdom.
If people want to find you online or on social media, where can they find you?
They can find me on Instagram. It's a Galit_Atlas, or maybe not underscore, Galit Atlas. You'll find me. And on Facebook, Galit Atlas PhD.
How about your book?
Oh, my book is everywhere where books are sold. Emotional Inheritance: The Therapist, Her Patient, and the Legacy of Trauma. And thank you.
Okay, great. Well, again, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for who you are. Thank you for what you do. And thank you for how you do it.
Thank you for your generosity.